Good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. You are tuned into Splashes and Pours with Sony Speedlights, hosted by Sony and the man of the hour, Sony Artisan of Imagery, Tony Gale. Tony, what's going on?
Not much. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Yourself?
Good. The weather's been nice, except for that apocalyptic couple of days. It's been lovely.
It's not bad. Not bad. Even yesterday, the humidity cleared out by the end of the day. As I told you, we were up in Inwood Hill, one of your haunts.
And, it's fantastic up there. Not enough people go.
Not enough people go there. We'll leave it right there. More of you should go check out Inwood Hill. It's a beautiful section of Manhattan. But Tony, we're getting into some motion, some action, some freezing beverages and liquids with Speedlights today. So for those of you who have not tried this, you're going to get a little bit of a crash course, I'm guessing, right, Tony?
Just, take some pictures, use a Speedlight. That's all you need to know.
That's it. That's all you need. Workshop over. Well, Tony, huge thank you to you as always. I know you do a wonderful job on these, so I'm going to step out of the way and I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
Sounds good. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Once again, for those of you who don't know me and those of you who do, I'm Tony Gale. I'm a Sony Artisan of Imagery. And today I'm going to be going over splashes and pours with Sony Speedlights. In addition to being an Artisan of Imagery, I'm a BenQ ambassador, a Manfrotto ambassador, and an X-Rite Colorati. And I want to thank B&H Event Space and Sony for having me here to go over this. If they weren't here, I wouldn't be here. So for those of you who don't know, who am I? I'm a commercial people and portrait photographer based in New York City. I realize splashes and pours aren't people and portraits. I did assist for a long time. I was a photo assistant for many years, and I assisted a really excellent photographer who did a lot of splashes and pours, which is how I learned a lot of it. Like I said, I'm a commercial photographer based in New York, editorial, corporate, and advertising. Coming up with Sony and the B&H Event Space, we have a lesson and critique series, Speedlights on Location, and then the following week, a critique of images that you submit taken with Speedlights on Location. And then we have experimenting with photography, and then a critique where, once again, you submit images, a critique of your experimenting with photography images. As well, we have one more portrait photo walk coming up next week, June 20th, in Central Park. All of that, I believe, is on the B&H Event Space website. If it's not, it will be soon. In addition, I can look right here and tell you. Most of it's up there. In addition, Scott Robert Lim is doing a couple of talks in July on chaos to harmony, understanding balance, order, depth, and story with composition, and composition and location, which looks like it's a photo walk, which is very cool. Scott Robert Lim's a great guy, also a Sony Artisan. And then Thibaut Roland is doing the art of black and white photography, sponsored by Sony. Excellent photographer. Also, as I have mentioned many times before, you might want to look at the Sony Alpha Female Facebook group. It's a very inclusive group. You don't have to identify as female to be part of it. Every week they do a micro grant where, based on a topic, you can submit an image and one person wins $500. Alpha Universe, great site to learn about all things photography and Sony. In addition, Sony introduced this fall the Alpha Universe forums, which is a great place to ask questions or show your work or get feedback. People are very nice on there. All right. I frequently talk about this. We are in an exciting time to be a photographer. There is an amazing amount of things that we can do with technology that just wasn't possible in the past. Even the splashes and pours, for example, you could, of course, do that with a film camera, but you didn't know what you had. And as I'll show, depending on how you do it, you're going to have a lot of frames that don't work. And so if you're shooting film, say you shoot 2 rolls of 36, you shoot them, you take them to the lab, you get them back, and turns out your timing was off and you had 0 frames or 1 frame that worked. That's no good. With digital, you can take a look, see if you got something good. If not, try it again, adjust your timing, all of that. It's amazing what we can do. So, splashes and pours with Sony Speedlights. Splashes are dropping something in water or liquid. Pours are pouring liquid. I do want to emphasize especially on this that's so technique heavy, that there are for sure other people who will have other ways of doing it. If it interests you and you think you don't want to do it my way, that's cool. Try somebody else's way. I sometimes look to see what other people are saying before I do a topic for the first time, because I haven't really done this with the B&H event space before. And I, on YouTube, for example, saw somebody who uses constant lights and just puts it on motor drive. I'm not a fan of that. I'll show you why, but it works for him. So different people have different ways of doing it. This is how I like to do it. The photographer I worked for didn't use Speedlights. He used these Ascor sun guns, which were very, 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 very old 1500 watt strobe packs that you plugged in sequence. And so if you needed 3000 watts, you'd plug one pack into the next pack. They were sort of terrifying, but they had a very fast flash duration, and they were enormous, absolutely enormous. When I worked for him, if we had another assistant in the studio, nobody else was allowed to touch them, just him or me, because they could be very dangerous. So why Speedlights? Starts with flash duration. So for those of you who don't know, flash duration is the amount of time that the flash is actually emitting light. And I say ish only because when flash duration is measured, it's never truly measuring the entire amount of time that light is emitting, because it's a curve. And I'll show you a little bit of that. It's typically measured as 0.1 or 0.5, 0.1, 0.5. It's totally not confusing at all. When you're looking at flashes and strobes, Speedlights don't tend to have flash duration. Speedlights tend to have very, 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 very fast flash duration, just by virtue of how they're designed. If you're looking at another light, so these are all monolights that I looked at that are available now. I'm not calling out brands because I don't want to point any fingers. If you look on the specs on the B&H website, sometimes a strobe or a flash will tell you the flash duration, and sometimes it won't. So to give you a sense of what's out there and why it can be difficult to really figure things out, there was a $330 monolight that said its flash duration was 1/900th of a second, T.1. T.1 is generally a better measure than T.5, and I'll show you why. So $330 got you 1/900th of a second. $120 got you 1/800th of a second. But when you look at that, is it 1/800th of a second at full power or minimum power? Typically, full power gets you the slowest flash duration, and minimum power will get you the fastest flash duration. So if that $120 monolight is 1/800th of a second at full power, that's almost as much as the $330 light. On the other hand, if it's minimum power, that's terrible. There's a $500 one that gives you the range, which is more useful. So it's T.1, 1/220th of a second, presumably at full power, to 1/10,200th of a second at minimum power. $600 light that just says 1/19,000th, probably at minimum power. And then a much more expensive light that has T.1, 6,500 to 1/1000th, or T.5, 1/13,000th to 2,200. With this one, you can see why 0.1 and 0.5 are different and why it matters to know what you're talking about. T.5, the numbers are much faster than T.1, and I will explain all of that. So if you're looking for a strobe that you want to freeze motion with, whether or not it splashes and pours, if it's dancers or action of any kind, understanding flash duration is really important. What the 0.5 is from halfway up the curve. The curve is the light turning on, it ramps up, it gets brighter and brighter, then it turns off and it gets dimmer, right? If you have an incandescent light bulb in your house and you turn on the switch and then you turn it off, you can see it glows for a fraction of a second before it's fully off. Flashes, strobes are the same way. So it ramps up, gets brighter, gets darker. 0.5 is halfway to brightest, halfway to darkest, halfway up the curve. So depending on how steep that curve is, it may be a pretty accurate representation of the amount of time, and it's certainly the amount of time that it's the brightest. T.1 is when it's a tenth of the way up and a tenth of the way down. So it's a longer amount of time that it's burning. So it's a more accurate measure of how much time it's actually spent emitting light, even though it's measuring when it's not as bright. I hope that makes sense. What gets tricky is that this is a nice curve that's pretty even. This is a curve with a long tail. So there are certain strobes that have a long tail where it gets bright quickly and then it slowly dims down. And this is where the T.1 is dramatically different than the T.5. So all of that's just to say, pay attention to what you're getting and understand why 0.1 is a more useful measure than 0.5. But a lot of strobe companies use 0.5 because it looks better. And again, you can just see an example. You know, the 0.5 on both of these is roughly the same, but the 0.1 dramatically longer with a longer curve. So Speedlights, very fast flash duration. Like I said, it's not typically included in the specs. On the left here, we have a Speedlight, Sony Speedlights, the HVL F60 RM2. And I'll talk about what Speedlights I was using specifically in a little bit. 2/50th of a second, F11, ISO 200. In the middle is a monolight, 600 watt monolight strobe at a quarter power. It's a discontinued strobe, but I looked it up. It was rated for 860th of a second at full power for flash duration. This was quarter power, so it should be quite a bit faster. And then an LED now at an 800th of a second. So to get the LED to F11 in 800th of a second, you could see I really had to crank the ISO up, which means you're more likely to get digital noise and grain from increasing the ISO. And here we are a little closer. Speedlight on the left, you can see it's pretty sharp. The monolight in the middle, not sharp at all. You can see the motion of the liquid falling because it's close to us, so we see the motion more dramatically, and it's moving fast because things fall quickly. And then the 800th of a second LED on the right, still some blur. 800th of a second isn't fast enough to freeze the motion, but it's did a better job than the monolight in the middle. All right, so hopefully that explains why Speedlights. There are strobes with fast flash durations. Be skeptical of the stated flash duration. It's a little like stated output power. It may or may not be accurate. And it's difficult to compare one brand to another because you don't know how they're measuring and if they're measuring accurately. You know, that said, if you buy a $12,000 pack, you know, the top of the line Pro Photo or Broncolor, those are designed to be fast. They're going to have good flash durations. As you spend less money, you got to be more careful. So what am I using here for this? So Sony Speedlights. I'm a Sony Artisan. I really like the Sony Speedlights. I'm a big fan. They're really well made. I am using the HVL F60 RM2 and the HVL F46 RM. The R stands for radio. If you're looking for new Speedlights, I really, really recommend getting the Rs, the ones with the radios built in. It's just going to give you more flexibility for off-camera usage. If you have an M, like the 20M or the 32M, or the older 60M or 43M, there's a solution for you if you need it. So 60 RM2, great Speedlight. 46 RM, great Speedlight. In addition, I use the wireless commander. So that's on the camera to control the Speedlights off camera. I very rarely use a Speedlight on camera, and for this kind of stuff, never, because the light's just not going to be what you want it to be if it's a direct flash. So I use the wireless radio commander rather than a Speedlight to command it, although you could use a radio Speedlight as your commander. I use the wireless commander. And the wireless receiver there, the WRR1, if you have an older Sony Speedlight that's an M, not an RM, you can get this radio receiver, plug your flash into that, and this becomes a radio receiver, so you can use it with a radio. Additionally, the FAEBA1 external battery pack, there'll be a quiz later on all this nomenclature. This takes 8 AA batteries, and it dramatically increases the recycle time of your Speedlight. It'll plug into the 60s, the 60 RM, 60 RM2, the 60M if you have it, and it will recycle much, much, much faster. And I'll give you an example later of why that might be useful. And then a lot of this I shot in the last couple of weeks just for this presentation. So I was using the Alpha 7R5 and the 70-200 GM2. In terms of lenses, you're probably not going to want to use a macro. You're going to want something where you can get a little distance between you and what you're photographing, because it's going to splash. And you don't want whatever's splashing to get onto your camera. And ideally not under your Speedlights. The Speedlights you could cover with a clear plastic bag and they'll be fine. You know, you could get a clear recycling bag, you could get a gallon Ziploc, put it over them to protect them. The camera is harder to protect, so you're going to want a little bit of distance between you and your subject. And then some things you may want to make it easier: a tripod, a remote. I really like the Sony Bluetooth remote. Depending on how you like to do it, a laser trigger. So most of these will work as laser triggers. Might be something to consider. A laser trigger is something that triggers the camera automatically when something breaks the field of the laser. So if you're dropping something into liquid, you can have it set up with a delay. So as soon as that laser is broken, it pauses, you know, a quarter of a second, an eighth of a second, whatever, 100th of a second, and then takes a picture. So you can get a lot of consistency. You'll get fewer things that miss, but you won't get as much serendipity. All right, so splashes and pours. One thing to start with, I'm going to get into how I do it with lighting, and there's plexi and there's all this stuff. That is great, and you can do a lot with that. You can start with whatever you have in a Speedlight. So this, I did in a hotel room bathroom in the bathtub. I put a black t-shirt on the bottom of the tub. I had my camera on a tripod. I had the flash on the camera, and I rotated it to bounce into the wall because, like I said, I don't like direct flash for this. So Speedlight on the camera, bouncing off of the wall, black t-shirt on the bottom of the tub to get a nice clean background, and just dropping the silverware into the tub. So the tank and stuff that you're going to see in a bit, that if you really want to try it, I would encourage you to make, to start with, just to get your, you know, your hands wet, so to speak, pun intended. You can do it with anything. You can do it with your sink. You can do it with your bathtub. You can do it on your stove. Do bear in mind, things are splashing. Be careful around electricity. Be careful that you don't slip. Make sure to keep paper towels and towels around to clean up the mess. Don't wreck your floors. Be careful. Liquid is tricky. All right, so we're going to start with pours. So pours, taking something, a liquid, and pouring it into something else. That's a pour. One of the things I would encourage you, if you really want to delve into this, is to get sheets of frosted plexi. The reason for that is it diffuses your light. You can get it in whatever shape you want, whatever size you want. And the frosted plexi, because it's flat and smooth, there's no wrinkles to show up in the reflection. So sometimes if you're using, say, a softbox, there's a little bit of wrinkles, and you might see that little bit of a wrinkle in the reflection of the glass or the tank or whatever. And that's no good. So plexi, no reflections because it's flat. Also plexi, if it gets wet, you just wipe it off. No big deal. So you can buy big sheets of plexi, mark it, get a little plastic cutter. You just score it, go like this a few times, snap it, break it in half, cut it to the size you want. If you're going to use sharp tools, be careful. Make sure you know what you're doing. Wear eye protection when you're breaking things that could splinter. Be very careful. Make sure you know what you're doing. We don't want anybody to get hurt. But then you can make the plexi whatever size you want. Buy bigger sheets and cut it down. So you've got your plexi, you've got your Speedlights. Here we have an example of cup of coffee, sugar cube, camera's on a tripod, it's on manual focus. I always do manual focus because if you do autofocus, it might focus on the wrong thing, and you're going to lose that little fraction of a second while it autofocuses. You don't want that. You want everything to be locked down and doing exactly what you want. Camera on a tripod, manual focus. I have a a remote release in my hand so I can trigger the camera from where I am. The reason I use a remote is because the distance between where I am to drop or pour is different than where the camera is in relation to this subject. So it's really hard to reach way over here with one hand to trigger the camera and way over here with the other hand to drop something. That's way too challenging. Just use a remote. And I realize I said pours and then I'm leading with a splash. But so then on the left, we have a piece of frosted plexi, about 18 by 20, probably 18 by 24, with the HVL F60RM speedlight behind it. Nice soft light. It's quite close. Another advantage with this kind of work, speedlights, obviously, they don't have as much power as a 600-watt strobe or a 1200-watt strobe, but they're so close to everything when you're doing this kind of work that they're plenty powerful. So one of the challenges is timing. So I mentioned you could do a laser trigger. The person I worked with didn't use laser triggers because he wanted the serendipity. He didn't want each frame to look exactly the same. And obviously it won't look exactly the same, but it will be very, very similar. So he would just time it. I'm a little out of practice when I did this. So here are my first 6 shots. First one, shot way too early. Second one, shot too early. Sugar cube still in the air. Third one, sugar cube still in the air. Fourth one, sugar cube still in the air. Fifth one, way too early. Sugar cube's not even there yet. Sixth one, sugar cube's in. We're getting a splash. You can see the sugar cube there at the bottom. We're starting to get it. You can see the splash. Everything's sharp. The shadow might be a little dramatic. There it is a little closer. We're losing the sugar cube a little because it's so deep. So the next thing I did, another piece of frosted plexi on the other side, just as a fill light. Now that shadow side, a little too dark here, a little bit better, a little bit more light on the sugar cube. This is the next successful shot. Sugar cube still in there, still a little dark because it's so deep, but it's getting there. It's better. And then plexi as a fill. On the other side, the main light side, instead of having the plexi roughly even with the cup, I've raised it up about 10 inches. And I've raised the speedlight up about 10 inches. So now the light, instead of coming all the way from the side, is now coming from the side and above. And it's filling in to the shadows, into the splash itself a little bit better. So we can see the sugar cubes better, and it's working a little better. And you can see I dropped 2 sugar cubes. So this, much more successful, I think. So that's one of the easiest ways to get started. Get a cup, drop something into it. Piece of cake. Put it on something, have towels. I had paper towels all over the place. Also, actually, I'll mention it again, but basically after every splash or every pour, you have to clean everything up. It's a slow process. You can see I didn't here, and there's coffee on the table. That's the one, those last 2 frames I didn't. The others, every frame I cleaned it up. It's a little annoying, but it's a lot easier to clean it up than to have that perfect frame and have to clean it up later. All right, so now we're really going to get into pours. So we've got this stemless wine glass. It's on a piece of black plexi surface, and behind it is a piece of black plexi. I like the black plexi because it reflects a little. You can see the reflection of the glass. This is, before I did any lighting, just room light. The ceiling lights are on. You can see all sorts of reflections in there. The glass doesn't look good at all. So now I've added the frosted plexi on the left with the speed light. It's way too bright. The highlights are much too bright. It's a little too specular. So the next step is I've just backed the light further away. So here, part of the reason it looks so bright where it does is because it's close enough to the plexi that it's not distributing light all the way across the plexi. It's only doing a piece of it. So we're getting that highlight. Here, I've backed it further away. So the entire piece of plexi is being lit, but you can see the edges of it, right? You can see those squares, and it's just one light on the left, but because it's curved, you're seeing the reflection all over the place. This is better. In a perfect world, what you would want is an even larger piece of plexi so that it's nice and soft where it is. And then on the bottom there, instead of that sharp edge, it gradually fades to dark with a bigger piece of plexi, because the plexi itself, the amount of it getting light gradually fades, so you don't have that sharp edge. But I didn't have a bigger piece of plexi, so I just lowered the light because this was still too bright. Lowered the light some more. Now we're in a better shape, I think. We're seeing the edge of the glass. The glass is more interestingly lit. We've got that side light. We still have that sharp edge on the bottom, but it's less apparent. A little bit darker, a little darker, and we're good. So now we're going to try pouring. This is tricky, right? It's the amount of times where I try and pour and I just miss the glass entirely is embarrassing. I'll show you a couple of those. So you start pouring and you're just guessing. For the first few times, you're taking a picture as you're pouring and you're guessing at what time to do it. Then you take a look and you see what you like. So on the left, very early, I do like the turbulence of the liquid. This is iced tea, by the way. Iced tea is a great thing to practice with. It's inexpensive. It's got nice color. It's not too clear. And it's not too sticky if you get unsweetened iced tea. Don't get sweet tea. Anything with sugar is a mess to clean up. So I do like that turbulence. There's not enough liquid. On the other hand, the one on the right, there's so much liquid that it's not that interesting. Trying some more. Trying some more here. Both of these, I missed the glass. You can see that. And then this one I liked better. You can see the liquid is not level, so you can see that it's moving. And I like the sort of globs of iced tea in the pour. All right, so next, different glass. That's a black background. Black can be great with the light coming from the side. If you want a lighter colored background, here we have still the black plexi in the front, or on the surface with the glass on top. And then behind we have frosted white plexi with the Speedlight behind that. So first, Speedlight's kind of in the middle. I moved it a little for the next one over, moved it much more over to the side for the third one. For the fourth one, sort of split the difference, but I also decided that the camera was too high. So those first three, too much of the glass was interfering. The horizon was interfering with too much of the glass. So I lowered the camera on the fourth one so that the horizon wasn't impacting as much of the glass, and I think it was more successful. Some people would try and do nothing, get the horizon completely level. I like a little bit, especially again, because I like the reflection. I think it's interesting. So here we are with a couple. The one on the left, kind of cool. These I was fairly happy with. You can see the globs. It feels like there's motion there. And the Speedlight is really freezing that motion well, I think. Again, that flash duration with a Speedlight, absolutely incredible. And this is just one, just the HVL F60 RM2. But now maybe you want to up your game a little. So this is an acrylic ice cube. Unfortunately, B&H doesn't carry them now. Maybe they will. Derek, Danny, tell somebody to start carrying ice cubes at B&H. The fake ice cubes, it's really easy to get inexpensive small ones, like 1-inch square ones. The big ones are not easy to get, and they're much more expensive. But they look nice. One thing to think about with acrylic ice cubes, if you're going to use them, is acrylic ice doesn't float, whereas real ice does float. You can get this rubbery ice that will float, that you break apart into different shapes. But for something like this, you don't want something that floats. So big 2-inch square piece of fake ice, couple more pours. Sometimes adding the ice, it helps break it up. It makes it feel like a real drink. You can see I didn't clean the surface well enough before. And now if I was going to use this picture, I've got to clean that up. Then I thought, I wonder how water is going to look. So I did one with water. Water looked boring. It's way too clear. You're not seeing enough. It just wasn't interesting. So now instead, I just thinned out the iced tea a little to get it a little lighter. Trying a couple here with the ice cube. I think the thinned out iced tea, I'm not sure if I prefer that or the regular iced tea, but it's worth trying and seeing what you like. And again, I should have done a better job cleaning off the surface. All right, now we're going to try a different glass. The shape of the glass makes a big difference. You know, you can see this has all these facets. This is a more curved shape. If you want the classic pour where it loops back up, you need a curved shape, a curved bottom, so it can, and you have to pour towards the edge so it comes back up. All right, so different stemless wine glass. Trying some different things. Here, I intentionally didn't clean up the surface, and I thought it was actually kind of cool. I really like the pour on the left. I'm getting that going in on the right, and it's returning up on the left and splashing up. If I had lots of time, and if this was for a client, I would keep trying that until I got one that was a little cleaner. On the right, I missed the glass with half of the liquid, although it looks kind of cool. Missing the glass with a bunch of the liquid again, but it looks cool. And then here, lots of turbulence. I think it looks, when the bubbles and the turbulence goes in there and you can see the shape and the liquid moving, I think that's where it looks cool. Same thing here, same thing there. So another option, and this is where that the battery pack I showed at the beginning can really come into play. If your timing is difficult, you can, if your Speedlights power is set low enough. I was at an 8th power for these. So 8th power, with the addition of the battery pack, I was able to shoot at 8 frames a second. And this gives you an example. This is just 5 frames, dropping those little 1-inch square ice cubes that I mentioned. You can see them on the bottom of the iced tea glass there. Dropping the ice in, just going 8 frames a second, blasting through, seeing what I got. So 5 frames in a row. You can see, so there were 2 in there already. I dropped a 3rd one, which caused the turbulence. Doing that allows you to get more hits. You may not get the perfect moment, but you'll get more moments. So I liked both of those. And that was the 2nd, 3rd frame there. All right, so that's pours. We should also mention, if you have questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A or on whatever service you're watching on, and we'll try and answer them. So let's talk about splashes. So splashes, sort of like that sugar cube at the beginning, or I guess dropping the ice cube. Splashes are dropping something into liquid, like this rose here. So the first thing you need if you're going to do a splash is you need something to drop things into that's full of water, probably water. You could try something else. So a fish tank can work. The challenge with a fish tank is glass can be brittle. You do not want to do something that causes a glass fish tank to break. And fish tanks tend to have that black frame on the top and the bottom, which can affect your lighting. You might see that reflected. And also, especially with splashes, but also with pours, generally you want to shoot wider, frame a little bit wider, and then crop later so that you make sure you don't miss anything. I know generative AI, now you can expand the frame, but I'd rather have it real. I don't want AI to build that for me. I want to capture something real. So a fish tank can work, or you can build your own tank. Building your own tank is surprisingly easy. These are 8x12 pieces of 1/4-inch clear plexi I bought online. If you're going to build a tank, don't get 1/8-inch plexi, get at least 1/4-inch. And if it's a big tank, go even bigger. Make sure, again, don't just take my word for it. Do your research if you're going to build something. I don't want anybody to flood their basement or their kitchen. Be really careful when you're doing this. So I bought a bunch of 8x12 plexi. I taped it together. Don't worry, tape is not what's going to hold it together. Actually, first, you want to peel the paper off one side of it. So I didn't peel the paper off the outside, just the inside here, because I don't want it to get dirty and scuffed up. So The paper's peeled off the inside. I've taped it in place so that it's the shape and size that I want. I could have cut those edges off with that the plexi cutter that I had before, but I just didn't. There's an acrylic cement called Weld-On, which is what I use. This can be very, very tricky. You don't want to get it on your skin. The smells can be strong. I would really recommend, if you're going to do it, that you do it outside. You can see I did this outside and you still smell it outside. Be very, very careful with this stuff. So Weld-On is a acrylic cement. So you just slowly, at all the joints, put it in, let it sit for a while so it stabilizes. And then I went in with clear silicone and did clear silicone on all of the seams as well. So you can see it there. Fish tanks always have clear silicone on the inside. I don't know if that's their only adhesive or not. So clear silicone everywhere. And then we have this tank. So after I let that tank sit for 2 days so that the silicone cured and the acrylic cement cured completely, I filled it up with water and left it in my bathtub overnight. And I did that to make sure that there was no leak at all, that nothing was going to happen to the tank. No water was leaking, because the last thing you want is to realize you missed a spot and now there's water everywhere. So here we have it on a whiteboard. You can sort of see on the bottom, I have a white tub there. It's a darkroom tray, actually, that I got to do cyanotypes. You want something to catch as much of the water as you can. A bigger tray is even better, because when you splash, you're going to get water on your floor, or your table, or whatever it is. Water is going to go all over. You want to minimize the cleanup. You definitely don't want anybody to slip. Do that. Now we're going to start setting up. So first, I floated a fake piece of lime wedge in the tank to focus, because when I'm doing it, at least I'm trying to focus midway through the tank. Until there's something in there, midway through the tank is just water. There's nothing to focus on. So I just put a piece of lime floating there to focus on that. And I put a piece of black foam core in the background because I wanted it dark. So single speed light, again, the HVL F60 RM2 on the left, A7R5, Alpha 7R5 on a tripod, the Bluetooth remote, and the 7200 GM2. Amazing, best picture ever, I think, right? This will win all the awards. All right, so I did this. The background does not look good at all. So I moved the speed light and I added a piece of black foam core there to help flag it off. So now the left and the right look better, but there's that light spot in the middle. That's no good. I've moved the speed light now over to the side more. That's also helped with the tank itself. All the stuff that's on the tank, because it hasn't been cleaned yet, is still there, but it just looks better, right? Everything looks better. The light looks better on the lime. The tank itself looks better. The background looks blacker. And then using that foam core, the other foam core sheet, just to flag it off a little bit more. Now it's starting to look good. You can see here, black foam core in the back, black foam core on the left, camera, speed light. That's the setup. And this is what I got. So this is a real lime, dropping it in there. This is the kind of serendipity, like, you can't plan this. This is why splashes and pours are cool, if you ask me. These are fake lime wedges. Another thing to think about if you have a tank is, whether it's a fish tank or a tank you built, you tend to get bubbles over time on the inside of the tank. So a little squeegee to just squeegee off the bubbles will make your life a lot easier, because trying to retouch out every bubble from the inside of a tank is miserable work. Also, when you're dropping things in there that are organic, bits of them tend to come off. So you might consider getting some fake stuff and starting with that. The fake stuff is sometimes too light. Like a real lime weighs a lot more than a fake lime, so it doesn't splash in the same way. But something to consider. Some cherries. All right, so the black, cool, dramatic, really makes the bubbles pop. Everything's cool. But maybe we don't want it to be a black background. Maybe we want it to be a white background. So to start with, everything's the same, except I've taken the black foam core out of the background. There's a piece of white seamless there. And there's the HVL F46RM on the right there, just pointed at the background to light the background. So this is just all the settings are the same. White seamless in the background with the light shining on the seamless. I think that looks pretty good. You do have to pay attention to your depth of field. I was shooting at f8 here, and I really should have been doing f11. I think the depth of field's a little shallow. So again, that's how that looks. Now, I wondered what would happen if I turned off the speed light just with the distance to the seamless back there. This is what that looks like. Don't like that at all. But you can see because the white seamless is so far away with the inverse square law, which we're not going to get into, the background goes quite dark, even though it's white. Now, same thing, but I've added a piece of frosted plexi behind the tank, and I put a speed light behind the plexi, aiming it towards camera. That tends to give a little bit more control because you can move the speed light around. It's similar to, we did the same thing with one of the pours with the white background. Some strawberries. Then I added in some contrast, which didn't really do much, bringing that in. Also wanted to mention all that stuff that I mentioned with plants and fruit and stuff that goes off of the tank. This is what it looks like. This is from flowers. It's a mess. So pay attention to your tank. If you really want to do this and you're taking it very, very seriously, you either have a pump nearby and you pump out your water and replace it, or you have a drain in the tank and you drain the tank and then refill it. And if you really care, you get distilled water, because distilled water is nothing but water. So there's no tint to the water. Sometimes tap water may have a little bit of a yellow tint. If your tank isn't very deep, not deep height-wise, but front to back, you probably won't notice, but it's something to be aware of. And you just got to clean stuff up. Here is an example of me not cleaning the tank well enough. You can see all that stuff in front of the tomatoes. Retouching that out, I'm not even going to bother. Not even going to bother. It's too much work. And it's a bummer. Now this is a much cleaner tank. Not clean tank, clean tank. Cleaner tank, cleaner tank. So one of the common things people drop in is fruit. A good friend of mine dropped a squid. She bought it at a fish market in and got a magazine cover out of it, 2 magazine covers out of it. Flowers can be cool. Really anything. Drop a Matchbox car in there, see what happens. All right, let's see if there are questions.
We're going to give them a minute to process, Tony, as always, and get their questions in. So everybody, if you do have questions out there, get them in. We have, of course, all of Tony's socials, websites, everywhere you can find him right here. I'm going to let you take a sip there, Tony. I'm going to throw out a question for you.
Sure.
Splashes or pours? What's more fun for you?
Splashes.
Splashes?
Yeah.
A little more creative, have a little fun with it. Pours seem a little more controlled.
I think so. And people that, if you're doing this for a client, for example, with a pour in particular, you build a rig so that everything is repeatable. So you're not just holding the thing and pouring. You've got like a tube and a spout and then a thing over here that you pour into. So it goes down the tube into the spout and in. So everything's aimed right. So where I was missing the glass occasionally because I was just eyeballing it. If you're doing it for a client, you can't waste time like that. So you build all this stuff to make it just so, but then it's just so, and sometimes a little less fun.
I know sometimes the fun comes in the experimentation, or you mess something up and you have like an unintended consequence that actually works out for you. You like it.
That's why next month we're doing experimenting with photography, because it's important to have fun and try things out and make mistakes and all of that. It's easy as you get more experienced, I think, certainly for me, to do things in the way that I know will work. And sometimes you just got to try stuff and let yourself fail and see what happens.
Totally. I mean, think about how many great things have been either discovered or invented, or you just came across by complete accident or something not going as initially planned.
Absolutely.
And I do want to take this time to remind everybody, we need you guys in these upcoming Tony Gale workshops. We're doing these two-part. One part is Tony teaching you. The next part is you submitting for critique. So when you guys do see those on the calendar, try something new. Don't just pull something out of your archives. I think it's always great to try to watch, learn, educate yourself, and then go from there. I know a lot of people, it's easier to pull from the archives. You know, you'd done a picture 3 years ago and you want to submit it for a critique. Challenge yourself, step outside the box and try something new. We did get a question in from Karen joining us here on Zoom,
Sure.
asking if watering cans are good for pours.
That's a good question. I've never used a watering can. I guess it would depend on what you're pouring into. I feel like the spouts on watering cans tend to split it up. It's a little bit like a shower head. So you have a whole bunch of little pours, and I feel like that might be a challenge with a pour to get something cool. But on the other hand, it makes me think, why not do a pour watering something? Like set everything up and water a rose or something and photograph that. Then it's almost like rain, Oh, my focus just went out.
It did, but your voice is still good. Your voice is in focus.
I leaned too far to the side. So yeah, try that. That could be cool. On the other hand, sometimes with watering cans, you can take that spout end off, and then you would have a lot more control and a lot of water. So you could do a bunch of pours in a row without having to refill it. Try it and see.
Okay. It's like you said, experimentation. You were thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about all the different things. I'm like, how many possible, water gun, spraying a water gun at the wall or something. It's like, there's always a way. There's always a way to make it happen.
I mean, it made me think, I wish that I had done an example with a plant, watering it. Like that's a pour. I didn't think of it until you mentioned the watering can. If I do this again, I'm going to have to do that.
You got to add that in. You got to take notes.
Yeah.
Update. We know you like to stay up to date and fresh with all your information.
Well, and if I do a similar topic, I like to update it. I don't want it to be the same talk again.
Totally. Well, that's what we love about you, Tony. It's always great having you on. Of course, all of our viewers out there always learn from you. You break it down super simple for everybody. And Tony dropped all of his socials, his website. I'm going to mention to him every time I talk to him from now until the Alpha Photographers podcast comes back. I'm going to bring it up.
Have you edited a podcast? It's a lot of work. I just looked at the list the other day. I did over 300 of them.
Wow. 300.
300. Yeah.
Right. No. And
there is one last one that's going to go up next week.
Okay. There we go. We'll keep an eye or an ear out for it.
All right.
And that's all we got for today, people. This is a nice,
thanks everybody.
Day. A lot of information in. A huge thank you to Sony for hosting 2 events today. We of course had back-to-back artisans, Monica and Tony, rounding out our squad for the day. And to all of our viewers, a huge thank you for you guys for tuning in. But alas, another rendition of the B&H virtual event space is in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Thanks everybody.